Welcome back to the 271st episode of the Daily Flip podcast. I'm your host, Alex, and today we're going to be flipping through some of the top stories, including two that highlight the changing conservative or more right-leaning populism throughout the entire world, and then using a supplementary essay about the slippery slope and how sometimes it's not actually a fallacy to kind of support and also highlight some of the things that are changing in all of these different countries around the world. We'll be looking at the US and the UK specifically. And of course, we'll end today with our daily delight, a story meant to leave you feeling positive and ready to take on the day. Now, that's enough rambling from me. Let's jump into the daily debate. This one's going to be very quick. It's going to be a question that everybody's asked. You've probably heard Mike Pence even say something to the akin of this. Are we going to be dragged down by the siren song of populism? Don't get me wrong, populism has its benefits in certain places, no doubt about that. But there are definitely certain things that go against conventional norms that we have set up, and even principles that we seem to hold so true and so dear that kind of clash. So we're going to examine a few of these principles that are emerging now from populism. But before we get there, I want to know your opinion. I want to know whether or not you think that populism is on average good, overall good, or is it on average bad? I know that's overly simplistic. If you want to give more detail, throw it down there. But if you had to say good or bad, just throw it down there, one word. Just throw it in the comments. Maybe you can start a conversation with somebody. I saw one of those open up the last few episodes. So, with that said, the first article that we have today is going to be talking about the trend in the U.S., and it comes from Business Insider. The headline reads, Trump's plan to tax the entire world will result in the type of global trade war not seen since the Great Depression, think tank says. And whenever there's think tank says, person from think tank, the Roosevelt Institute, the Manhattan Institute, the XYZ Institute, Heritage Foundation, whenever you have anything like this, you do have to take pause, of course, because every single think tank, sometimes they can sit a little bit too much on their behinds, but they are normally the repository of a lot of brilliant people who, at least, whether or not you agree with all their politics, they do take a lot of time to think some of these things out. So, when I first saw this headline, I was like, okay, taxing the world. Interesting. And then when I read the very first point they have here, because they do kind of like an Axios summary, but they do like 3 or 4 bullet points in some of their articles. And the first one is, quote, Trump's plan for a universal tariff on all U.S. imports could set off a global trade war, a Peterson Institute fellow said. And then everything started to come together. Oh, tax the world. When I first saw tax the world, I was like, whoa, wait. Is Trump going to, agree with some of the things that Biden had been saying that he wants to do, which is have basically a global tax that applies to everybody across the world? Or in the case specifically they were talking about is a corporation or a global corporate tax versus something that may be more aimed at citizens. And that's what I thought when I read this. I was like, oh, is Trump proposing something like that? That would be outrageous. And then I understood what they were talking about when they talked about tariffs, and I said, yeah, no, that's also stupid. Don't get me wrong. I've given Trump his dues. I've given Biden his dues, especially on some of the CHIP Act stuff, when I think he is doing something right. Or even if I don't agree with it, but I think it's at least politically advantageous to him, I think I've given both of them their fair dues. But when I heard this, I was like, Trump, come on. So the example of the tariff mentality has been present in both of these administrations. Biden has continued the Trump tariffs and actually jacked up some more on China, and Trump obviously initiated those. He was taking a hardline position against China. And whether or not you liked those tariffs, at least having targeted tariffs at a certain country, they could be used to leverage our economic power against them if we believe that their behavior is unacceptable. But in the case of the China tariffs, it was more, at least it was argued to be a more strategic and foreign policy type attempt to rein in China and affect our relationship, our trade relationship with that nation, versus, oh, no, hey, we're just trying to make it so that other countries have a harder time selling things within the United States. And that's exactly what this tariff will do. And the article goes on to highlight a little bit of historical precedent and then talks about what the actual plan is. So I will skip between the few paragraphs that highlight the historical precedent and what the current idea coming from the Trump administration, or excuse me, the Trump team is. Quote, this spawned the 1930 Tariff Act, so talking about the onset of the Great Depression and things like that. Quote, but the legislation was far more ambitious than first conceived. Aside from just agriculture, a wide swath of industries and notched new protections, and import tariffs rose an average of 47%, which is, whew, I mean, that's insane. Okay, let's just take a step back here and say that we're charging a country. We're basically every single product that's coming in from, I don't know. Let's choose Nigeria. Every single product that's coming in from Nigeria, we are saying, okay, there's a tariff on your products. It's roughly $1. Okay. Now with a 47% increase, it's 1.5. That doesn't seem like it's that bad. I mean, from what we're talking about, it's probably not the end of the world, right? What, you paying an extra 50 cents for Nigerian products? Most people probably wouldn't be too upset, but you have to think about the people who get multiple pieces of their product or pieces of their machinery that they use to operate within their business from Nigeria. You have to think about the fact that we're actually weighting the economy in favor of American goods. And hey, great, that sounds okay. But remember, overall, if prices for everything else outside of America or that are coming into America from outside of America go up, that's going to cause a little bit of inflation. It's going to actually create protectionist policies that insulate the American companies that would be making the same goods. And you may be saying, hey, well, that's great. The American made in America market is going to blow up. It's going to be amazing. And that does sound awesome. We are buying more products made at home because the tariffs have raised the prices a little bit of products from other places. American citizens can now buy made in America products for similar prices. So it's a protectionist policy trying to insulate those firms. Well, it has actually a negative effect on those firms too. They actually have a harder time selling around the world because guess what? The next line actually highlights what happened when the U.S. actually put down this tariff act. They put it into the books in 1930. Quote, the world economies fired back almost immediately, even before the bill went into effect. About a dozen countries retaliated with their own restrictions. Great Britain followed a year on, imposing tariffs of up to 50%, Wolf said. So we are at a competitive disadvantage around the world because just like we're trying to protect our own products, we're trying to protect our domestic market, everybody else is trying to do the exact same thing, and they're trying to protect their firms that are exporting to other places. So you're just creating a spiral of jacking up the prices because guess what? If Great Britain is saying, okay, well, we would love for our firms to be able to work in America, sell in America, but they're getting tariffed right now, and we need to make sure that they're at least, semi-competitive within our own market because we can't just let that go unresponded to. We can't just let the Americans make it harder to buy our products in their country, and then it's still easier to buy their products in ours. And also, there's a little bit of, okay, if they're protecting their companies, then we need to insulate our companies a little bit. And what's interesting about the protections that were put in place, because as they highlighted here, it was actually agricultural workers and farmers that were pressing for these tariffs in the early 1900s. The farming industry in America is still heavily subsidized, and this is what happens when you cannot properly roll back protectionist policies. And to be fair, there is a geostrategic element to it at this point because we do supply a lot of food to places around the world. So you could say, well, no, we have to protect it now. But the question is, did we reach this point? Did we fall down this slope because of the fact that we created those protectionist policies, and in order to make sure that we can hold our position on the world market, now we have to heavily subsidize these different industries? It's a serious question. This is what happens when protectionism takes over. The question has to rise: when do we stop? Can we stop? If we stop supplying, or okay, I'll break it down into two sections. If we stop having this tariff, are our companies robust enough to actually compete in the wider market? Because of the retaliatory tariffs, they haven't had the ability to work at the most efficient level in other countries, and therefore they have been mainly focusing on the US market. They may have some share overseas, but they haven't had the ability to and the want to actually compete over there as much because they're getting their lunch, basically taken from them. And also, they have the protected market here in the United States. They have the backing of the United States. So even if you start to roll back some of the tariffs, the question is, will they be able to sustain the current level within the United States market and also be competitive overseas if we roll back some of these tariffs? And even if you want to roll back some of the tariffs, but you still want to make sure that they're propped up, guess what you start doing? Just like the agricultural sector, you start to subsidize it heavily. So that's not necessarily saying, hey, we're going to take an aggressive place in as a middleman in the process for the goods that are coming from Britain over to the United States. We want to roll back some of that policy so that the tariffs don't actually keep escalating and we don't start seeing higher prices absolutely everywhere. That's the response to someone who's seen the tariffs go a little bit crazy, and then they look at the market that they're trying to take down the tariffs for, and they make the analysis that, hey, that company or these companies, these American firms aren't going to make it if we roll back these tariffs, but we have to do it in order to, ease the tensions trade-wise between nations. Well, guess what? The next solution is to start subsidizing them, and we still see this, and I keep going back to the agricultural industry, but it is one of our most heavily subsidized industries within the United States of America. So you can tell I don't want to say inevitable, but you can tell where the slippery slope starts, and you can see where it ends with protectionist policies. And I know I said I wanted to get to Trump's current policies, but I do want to take a second to go to a separate article from the Foundation for Economic Education. And the headline here says, "The slippery slope fallacy is really a fallacy?" ? And the reason I want to focus on this is because the argument that I'm presenting here, that these protectionist policies make it easier, they provide a path, at least they open up the door to a trade war. That's what the Business Insider article highlights, but also the fact that it increases inflation. It actually weakens our companies on the world stage, doesn't allow them I don't want to say it doesn't allow them the ability to compete on the world stage, because they still very well could and face the tariffs head on, but some firms can become complacent in the protection of their own market. Look at the automobile industry in India. I've highlighted this multiple times because it was a case study that I did when I was in college, and their automobiles, they're okay, they're good. I mean, the Indian government has really blocked a lot of Chinese firms from exporting their cheaper cars into India, but are they the best they could be? Would they be able to compete on the world market? No. I mean, they're an affordable option. They get the job done, just like how the Soviet Union, and I'm not trying to say that India's quality of cars is exactly to the Soviet Union standard, but the Soviet Union's policies of not allowing external companies to interact in their market, and let's be clear, tariffs aren't exactly the same way, but they at least increase the barriers, they make it harder. It's going to lead to those internal companies only being compared against one another instead of foreign competition, which spurs them on. And as a marketplace within a nation would become more concentrated, imagine the tariffs go into place into a market that only has two competitors within a domestic market. And now they don't have to worry about that foreign competition that's been spurring them on for years and years and years. What would happen if Apple didn't have to deal with Samsung anymore. It didn't have to deal with Chinese competitors. Don't get me wrong, there are still some Android phones now, maybe Google's Pixel, but imagine that happens in 2013. Apple may not push forward as quickly. They may slow down. They may not integrate some of the things that they're seeing from Samsung around the world if Samsung's basically blocked out of the US market because every single phone has an extra 50% markup on it. So you have to take these sort of things into account, and you want to make sure the whole point of free trade, the whole idea of free trade, especially on a global scale, is that we want to inspire competition. We want to push everybody to be the best supplier of X, Y, or Z that they can, and the more competitors they face, the more broad the market, the more they have to stay on top of their product design. They have to make sure that their customers are satisfied, so on and so forth. And when you start shutting those doors off, sure, you are trying to protect the nation's identity in the products that it creates. And you may be saying, what do you mean by that? In that this is an American brand, and we want to make sure that it stays in business. It's iconic to us. It belongs to the American people, so to speak, or at least it is ingrained in the American culture. There is something to speak about keeping these sort of companies alive. There is no doubt in my mind Microsoft is an American company at this point. And to see Microsoft go under would really make us question, are we on the front lines of innovation anymore? Think about Intel chips and everything like that. They've been surpassed, but it's still a American company with a deep history that was pushing the industry forward. Texas Instruments, they were also doing the same thing with the electronic chips that they were using and selling to other people at the beginning of the computer age. All of these companies have a distinctly American identity, but do you have to be so fragile about protecting that American identity and ensuring that those companies survive, or do you want to encourage them to be better and allow them, and I'm not saying they're going to win out on the world stage, but at least allow them the opportunity to promote American values, or at least give the best product to people, at large around the world. And therefore, because they have to compete in more markets and they're competing with more people who have lots of different strategic advantages, they're probably going to have to start lowering their prices. They're going to have to offer very special, they're going to have to provide very special niche answers to problems that they can do but other people can't. And this is constant innovation and iteration in order to differentiate themselves among other products. If there's only two, you only have to differentiate yourself so much. If you're facing 100 different products out there, what's your differentiation going to be? It's got to be, maybe you're in a niche, maybe you're the cheapest, maybe you're the cheapest in the specific niche. But guess what? You have to be able to iterate, keep innovating, and find something that consumers love. And we want to continually go down this path because at the end of the day, to go forward, we have to push the bounds of everything. And that's why, even though materialism, consumerism is super, super annoying, and people want to always push back against it, it still pushes us forward. Now, maybe at too much of a breakneck pace, you could make that argument with me. There may need to be restraints, whether they be social or some sort of, I was going to say government intervention, but even then, it makes me questionable about it because then they're putting their hands on the scale of the market. And let's be clear, I am not unempathetic to these ideas before. I have literally proposed ideas before. But if I'm going on the purist route here, talking about international trade and not having tariffs as high, we need to follow that exact same vein, and we need to acknowledge that if we're going to limit things because we believe that the consumption and materialistic nature of our economy that is causing us to innovate too and iterate too quickly and pushing us towards a bad place, if the government gets involved in that process rather than us regulating it as a social institution, as a culture, if the government puts their hand on the scale, they are directly influencing the market and shaping the future of the innovation in that space. And while you have to mitigate the bad, if you completely shut off the option, which is normally how government does things, they're a little bit too heavy-handed when answering these problems, then you could shut off an entire path of iteration that had one or two bumps that we were trying to mitigate for, but rather, no, we're just going to stop building the road altogether. So these are serious questions. And I know you're probably sitting there like, Alex, whoa. That is definitely a slippery slope fallacy. Just because X could equal Y, that doesn't mean we're going to go there. And that's why I wanted to pull up this article specifically, because it really does recontextualize the argument for, or at least the argument around, the slippery slope fallacy idea. Because for the longest time, we have fallen into this idea that the slippery slope fallacy means, okay, A equals C, or A equals D, and B and C are further down the slope taking us there. It's a straight path. But no. What this article does is highlight the slippery slope argument only has to say, on some level, that by doing A, it becomes easier to reach C, even if B is not a straight line to that point. Quote, but now let's say your friend tells you he's driving 1 mile in the direction of the ice cream store. There isn't enough time for your friend to drop you off at the store itself, but your friend does offer to take you 1 mile closer. At this point, your walk shortens from 4 miles to 3 miles, and now you're willing to make the trip. Economists would describe you here as being on the margin. You're right on the edge of deciding to get the ice cream cone. So at 4 miles, you're saying it's a little bit, this is me quoting, this is me speaking now. At 4 miles, you're a little bit too far away, but you say to yourself, at 3 miles, I'll be okay with it. And then the article goes on to say, quote, at this point, your walk shortens from 4 to 3 miles, and now you're willing to make the trip. So in this example, your friend coming and saying, hey, yeah, I'm going to a separate place that's 3 miles away from the ice cream store. I'm not going to drive you the whole way, but I'll at least take you that extra mile. Just because your friend is willing to drive you there, it doesn't mean that you're going to go to the ice cream store. No. There's not a direct line between the two, but the action A, the friend driving you that extra mile, enables you to reach your final goal of getting to the ice cream store. This is basically how you would make an argument about a slippery slope. It doesn't have to be A gets you directly to C, or A gives you a straight line to C, that from this action, the only inevitable thing that will happen is this. The only slope downward is to the end point. No. All it has to be is an enabling force. All it has to be is make the ability or the chance of reaching C higher. And I think this is something we lose in the context of these conversations, especially when we're talking in the terms of politics, is because very often, even in college, I would run into a professor and say, no, that's a slippery slope fallacy. And I said, what do you mean it's slippery slope? Well, he's saying this will equal this. And I would say, okay, would you not agree that if this happens, this other thing is more likely? And sometimes he would say, no, I think that's absolutely absurd, which in that case, it probably was a slippery slope fallacy for me. I wasn't making a coherent argument that would actually provide some path to my ending point, the point that I saw things ending at from the initial action. And some other times I would explain things and he would agree and say, okay, I see where you're coming from. That's still a slippery slope fallacy. And it always really frustrated me because I was sitting there saying, I'm not saying that this is the end all be all, just like I'm saying in this article here. This is not the end all be all. Just because Trump is putting in these sort of populist policies because it was really popular with his base, or the British government is putting in the populist policies that we're going to talk about here in a second, that doesn't mean that populism is bad. It doesn't mean that populism will only lean in one direction, but it definitely shows that there is a path down to how do we directly buy the voter. And you may be thinking, Alex, what do you mean by that? The reason I'm talking about this UK article is because the UK has gone back and forth between the United States' movements, and we've kind of mirrored them. They've kind of mirrored us. Their conservative election was in 2015. The first conservative election with Boris Johnson as like an undersecretary, and then Trump won, and then Boris came into more power. David Cameron's kind of kicked out. Brexit starts to happen. All of these things, whether or not Britain was telegraphing America's moves or America was telegraphing Britain's further move to the right, it's still, I don't want to say necessarily contested, but the path isn't necessarily as clear. But you can definitely tell that these two countries are moving in tandem, especially on the populist front. Because when Trump is out here saying, and I want to read the stat before we move on to that other article very quickly, the average U.S. tariff right now is 3% as per the article. Guess what Trump wants to raise the tariff to? Quote, the Republican candidate has made tariffs a cornerstone of his prospective trade policy, proposing a 10% universal duty on all imports heading into the U.S. As for Chinese goods, Trump is touting tariffs as high as 60%. 10%. 10%. That's going to triple the current. That's more than triple the current tariff we have on some of the highest tariffs that we have on specific industries, and a 10% universal tariff. Okay, think about that. Any product that is not made solely in the United States, any product that relies on any part coming from the nations outside the United States, imagine its price goes up by 10%. And maybe that's not even true. Maybe the parts are, 25% of the parts are from overseas and 75% of the parts of a certain product are made in the United States. So in aggregate, you're paying, an extra 10% on that 25%. So the price actually goes up by like 2.5% altogether. That doesn't seem like a lot. Now imagine that across the entire economy. We're already going through an inflationary scale. We're already going through an inflationary point right now. And now you're asking the American people to take on the burden of paying more. That's exactly what they have to do. That's why tariffs are something you shouldn't do as just economic policy, but rather do as a foreign policy objective. Because guess what? When there's a foreign policy objective, at least you can go to the American people honestly and say, hey, I know it's going to be painful. We don't want to do this, but we're doing this in order so we have a strategic advantage against China. Versus the argument, which is we're just trying to bolster the American economy. Sure, you're going to get short-term gains among American-only firms, but are you really preparing them for success in the future when the next administration comes in and rolls back some of these tariffs? No, I don't think so. And you're asking the American people to burden that right now and then not see the benefit in the future because their firms start to close down as they start to face more competition from an outside world that has had they have had more time to develop in a more robust system that challenges them, and as the American firms that have been born during the protectionist time or even became accustomed to the protectionist time go back out into the world, they're going to realize real quickly and they're going to get punched in the mouth because they have lived in a false world of American-only markets, or at least a protected by the U.S. government market. And though I'm not saying it's a slippery slope that leads directly there. I'm saying it's a slippery slope where it's possible. And we need to take this into consideration because I think these sort of policies, which are definitely more populist in nature, because guess what? His tariff policies, especially when he was going after China, they were really popular with his base because his base saw it as a way to raise the prices on other Chinese goods in order to incentivize people and firms to work here within the United States. Didn't necessarily work out for Donald Trump exactly how we wanted. No, we've actually seen some of the data here, and some people brought jobs back to the United States, but it wasn't as much as Trump had wanted. The overall jobs during his administration did grow, but that doesn't mean that they grew in the industries he wanted them to, especially in manufacturing. And he's going back to this because I think he recognizes that this was something that on some level people hear and they say, yes, okay, we're putting America first. We're making sure that we get an even deal, that we're making sure that everybody else is trying to take advantage of us on the world stage. They have to come to terms with the fact that we're America and we want to buy America, and you can't get a better deal. You can't sell your cheap products here and take advantage of our consumers. Something to that effect. I think that sort of populist message resonates with him. And the reason this slippery slope was in here is because I think that sort of mentality, that sort of populism leads to what we're seeing in England right now. And like I said, we mirror each other a little bit. Whether this, what's happening in England is a mirroring of Trump's policy of just giving out money during COVID times and just having those checks sent out to make sure that people knew the government, aka he, was looking out for them, or if this is the next progression of Trump when he's in office and trying to help out his people that put him there. It's something that's like this story coming from the BBC. Tories, aka the Conservative Party in the UK, pledge cash for towns as Labour pitch benefits plan. So this is a very interesting flip in the politics of Labour and the Tories in England. And when I first read it, I was kind of baffled, but they are kind of responding to this populist moment. And that's why this policy, in my opinion, let's be clear, there's more to it. And I'm not saying it's just political bribery. Some people would make that argument. It's even hinted at here in this article. But I'm saying this is the sort of populism that you see, which is, hey, I am the person who is able to best benefit you. You put me into power here so that I can manipulate the faucets, the handles of the water, and I can make sure that the bucket in your area gets full rather than somebody else's area, because that is why you put me into office. And populism has a lot more branches, a lot more nuances to this. There's no doubt about this, but I do think this is a inevitable conclusion, because guess what? When you're focused on populism, very often you may have some principles, which is, hey, I'm going to drain, in Trump's case, I'm going to drain the swamp, but at the end of the day, you don't have a fiscal budget principle. Like Trump said, hey, we're spending a whole bunch of money. He spent even more money. You even saw the same thing during Reagan. Reagan was trying to decrease some spending. Spending also went up during Reagan's time. Both of these men are very populist figures on the conservative side of the aisle. And the reason that they can justify the spending is because at the end of the day, they're people like some of the benefits that they're getting. Even if they're cutting budgets here and there and trying to defund certain locations, the overall spending's still going up, checks are still going out, and they are still making sure that the base is happy. And one way to placate your base, one way to respond to the people who are saying, hey, we're having a rough time right now, I'm losing my job, rather than just getting tariffs and trying to build up the infrastructure and enable the building of more jobs that would actually be able to supplement that person's income when they go and work and put in those hours, you could also just give them money. Quote, the Conservatives have pledged to give 30 towns across the UK 20 million each in an expansion of its leveling up policy if the party is reelected. This is like a Biden saying, oh, if I am elected president, sorry, he didn't actually sound that nice. If I was elected president, I will initiate student loan forgiveness. And sorry, I don't know why I kind of did a little Clinton there. I started with Obama, and I did a little bit of Clinton. I just can't do the old man too well. I'm sorry, Mr. President, if you're listening. I will work on my Joe Biden. I'm so sorry. But it's similar to, hey, this is what I could do for you, and this is the money I could give you, essentially. And I don't necessarily think that it's bribery, because the conservatives in here, they quite literally say, hey, we're not just trying to pay our own towns where we went. It actually goes out to a whole bunch of towns that were in a specific committee that were outlining where this money is needed. But they did list those towns off beforehand, and they're saying it's basically contingent on if the party is reelected. And I'm sitting here like, what? They're just offering money to these towns if they're reelected? If that is not political bargaining wide open, if that's just not favor trading out in the open, I don't know what is. And the fact that the Conservative Party, let's be clear, the conservatives that are in England are not like the conservatives in America. Both of the party, if you're looking at the Overton window. If you're looking, okay, I like this one. If you're looking at a ruler and America is, the middle of America's politics is at 6, the right wing is at 5, and the left wing is at 7. The middle of British politics is at 8, the right wing is somewhere around 7, and the left wing is somewhere around 9 inches across that ruler. So they're just, overall, their politics is just more left in general. But even the Conservative Party doing something like this, and then the Labour Party coming back with, quote, the Liberal Democrats said that the Tories have failed to deliver their level of promises and policies that pitted councils against each other and left them begging for scraps. The Scottish National Party said the Tory approach was delivering no grain of investment in our communities. And guess what? When your plan to bring back more jobs, to cut back on the size of the government and make sure that people feel less in their lives tends to fail, the thing that you can do for them, and I'm not saying it always fails, but when your initial message fails, especially on the conservative side of the aisle, the thing you can offer them is money, just like every other politician, because at the end of the day, your hands are on the nozzle of where the appropriations and those fundings go. And I just think that it highlights what can happen when the populist moment, I don't want to say goes too far, because I think there are lots of valid things in the populist moment, especially with like grassroots organizing and funding. I mean, that is one thing where, let's be clear, super PACs still have a lot of power, but people on an individual scale also have a lot of power now with their dollars that they can contribute. And this is one thing that is beautiful about populism. It allows people to get their voice more directly heard, but it also shifts the incentives for the people in power. And then you start having things where it's like, oh, well, okay, I can just give some of this money back to the people from our government programs because they love it so much, and I'm just vying for their vote rather than I'm just vying for their happiness and their love, rather than being a leader, even if it makes them sad. That, because I feel like that is one of the incentives that gets born of populism, which is, okay, how can I just rally as many people as possible to remain within my coalition? That is how governing always works. But in populism, especially, in the way that there's not a certain mitigating factor, such as a really strong party system that actually filters out some of the worst people who would be within the party system. If that filter mechanism is basically removed and it is solely who can appeal to the people the most, their most base instincts, you're going to start seeing policy which is, hey, we can just start giving you money for this and that, rather than looking at the more principled issues, which is, well, hey, I would love to provide this for your family. I would love to give you a solution here. But we need to really reconcile with our budget here. And I want to make sure that this country is around and solvent, at least, when it comes to our debt, is solvent for your grandkids, not just you in the moment. So I think this is a natural offshoot of populism. I think we have to acknowledge, of course we have to acknowledge, this is stupid. I actually hate when people say that. We have to acknowledge the populist moment. No. We have to take these lessons from the populist moment and fold them back into our politics going forward. But I do think that it also raises particular questions. And that's the beautiful thing about any movement from one side to the other. The progressive movement that bore the populism of the 1930s, 40s also bore out those tariffs policies in order to protect labor unions that were United States and it were part of the United States. And the labor unions were able to really easily organize everybody because they had access to everybody who paid dues. They could almost directly talk to all of them. They could say, hey, this person really supports our union. So they were a powerful voting bloc, and therefore there was a lot of grassroots organizing on their part. And that's why some of the populism grew in the 1940s. We learned our lessons from that. We kind of had a more mainstream locked-in politician class for a while. It bred the I don't want to say globalists, but the institutionalists, the middle politicians, hey, this is about DC politicians who didn't differ too much on varying issues. And once the people saw that they no longer served their interests, we have another populist moment. We will probably reap the benefits of it to some degree. We will also have to learn from its pitfalls, and we will keep on evolving. We're never going to make it perfect, but we can try to always maintain the good things that we've learned from the past and try to be better going forward. And we just have to make sure we don't keep forgetting the lessons of the past, because I guarantee you, if you ask anybody about the labor movement in the 1930s, they would probably not recognize the power that it had. And let's be clear, I don't understand all of the repercussions of it. Lots of people, there are two different historical arguments about the lasting repercussion of the union battles and the progressive moment of the 1930s and 40s. One side says that it was what spurred the economic growth coming out of World War II, and another side says that no, it wasn't the progressive policies. People were, the most elite class were still holding money in their corporations. It was America being ascendant on the world stage and being the only, really the only sole economic power, and having a rival in the USSR to spur them forward and unite the American people and keep us focused. I mean, there are lots of different theories that highlight that, and to pretend as though I could 100% know which one is 100% true would be idiotic. But to not look back and at least not observe some of these theories and try to learn the lessons of our past and analyze the similarities to now in our times and try to apply those lessons, make sure we don't forget them, but also recognize that this is going to have to play out its course. You can't just, end populism, but you do have to make sure that you're hypercritical, or not hypercritical, but just critical of it, and analyze all of these shifts and ask yourself whether or not this is something that you want. Sorry, this has been a really long episode, but it really is this is the continuity of populism, and I believe that this is going to be the inevitable conclusion to populism as well. But overall, we've examined most of the modern iterations of it. We've done episodes on it in the past. If you want to go listen to those, I think there's 2 that you could probably Command F when you go through the playlist that directly use populism in the title or the thumbnail. But that's enough with all that drab stuff. Let's jump into our daily delight. And this one comes from outdoors.com. The headline reads, "Trail cam footage shows baby red foxes venturing outside their den." And when I first saw this, I was like, "Oh, okay, that's pretty cool." And it's honestly just the adorable nature of the pups that got me. I mean, you have 2 of the brothers and sisters like tapping noses, kind of looking at each other like, "Hey, what you doing? Why are you in my space?" And there's 2 laying down. There's 2 about to be rough playing, and mom's just sitting there like, "Come on, guys. What are we doing?" Kind of like that little head tilt, like, "Oh, this is what I gotta do. I just gotta watch after these little naive people." So I thought it was kind of adorable. If you want to check out the photos or videos from that article, or you want to read any of today's articles, all of them will be linked in the description below that like and subscribe button. How I will lay it out, because I read them, or at least brought them in very particular order. It'll be the Trump tariff article, then it will be the slippery slope argument article, and then it will be the BBC article talking about the Conservative Party there in Britain. Also down there, you can find the link to the podcast on Spotify, Pocket Cast, Google Podcasts, which I know is going away, but the link's still up there, and it still can be viewed for a little bit, as well as the link to the podcast on Podvine and the Twitter handle @YourDailyFlip, where I post a Twitter tirade every Tuesday and Thursday. So, with all that said, there's only one more thing to say. Stay safe, don't die.